Hello and welcome to another edition of the LaLanne Pass It On podcast. My name is Greg Justice, and I am here with the star of the show, Elaine, LaLanne. How are you today, Elaine?
Well, I'm always good. I always have a positive attitude, and we've got a fun person today. And you know what? When I was young, I was a good jump roper. And then we're going to talk about jump roping today, and I'm going to let you introduce him. Okay? All right.
Mark Rothstein has established two world records for endurance rope jumping of more than 22 and 36 hours. Since the 1980s, Mark has toured the United States and abroad, performing more than 12,000 live shows to more than 6 million people. Now, the inspirational theme of Mark's work and the legacy which he nurtures each day is to exemplify impeccable integrity, stay fit through consistent exercise, and work each day to build a virtuous life. Mark was inducted into the National Fitness Hall of Fame in 2011, and it is an honor to call him friend. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, LaLa. Indeed, it's my honor to be a part of your podcast, and it's just whatever we can do to keep the legacy of Jack LaLanne alive as he has inspired millions. So thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you, Mark. And yeah, you've been jump roping for so long, but I want to know, when we're kids, that's one of the things we learn to do. And so I want to know when you started jump roping and what prompted you to go really to go into it so deeply.
Well, that's a great question, and thank you for asking. I actually started when I was 7 years old in my parents' living room, and I didn't even break any of the furniture. So it was a good beginning. But I started just like most children would, is using jump rope for exercise and fun and fitness. And then as life evolved and I got more involved in sports on the high school and collegiate level, I realized the art of rope jumping can be very helpful with fitness, agility, conditioning, etc. Then post college, I realized that, hey, people kind of enjoy watching you, kind of like when you see some of the famous boxers and their footwork and their skill set with rope jumping. It's can be entertaining to watch. So, and that led up to the early days of when Reebok came over from the United Kingdom and started some grassroots programs, finding people, hiring people to do programs to promote Reebok shoes. And that's when it really launched. And that was back in the early and mid 80s. So there was some entertainment value in doing programs. Then from there, I created a career out of it, which was about 40 years ago, and trying to obviously inspire people to be fit, but also implementing important character building messages such as integrity, respect, honesty, trying our best. And as the great Jack LaLanne, said, keep working, keep moving, keep fit. So it's been a great career for 40 plus years. And now at age 65, I feel very privileged, very blessed, very fortunate that I still do what I do and still able to perform all
Easy.
around the country.
Hey, look, I want to show you this. Speaking of 40 years, now tell us when this was out. This you sent us, you sent Jack and myself this, and I've had it all these years, and it's one of these 1 inch tapes. You know how you remember how had the 1 inch tapes in here,
Yeah,
and
that's the good
so
old VHS tape. That was my first video. It was an instructional tape with 40 skills on it. And I produced that in 1991. And to add a little bit to your story, I would always mail 2 copies to Jack when I produced my video. One was, and I'm honored that you still have it, and the other I had asked him to autograph and send back to me. So I still have a collection where Jack LaLanne has autographed each and every one of my 6 videos. So I'm honored that you still have that.
Wow. I'm honored and Greg's honored because of the legacy, right, Greg? Because he's really into the legacy.
Absolutely. I mean, it truly is all about legacy. And Mark, you and I go back several years, and I know you have always, it's always resonated with me how much passion you have for inspiring people and furthering Jack's legacy. And that actually kind of led to you doing your first world record back in 1989, I believe it was, and you were inspired by Jack. And tell us a little bit about that first world record, how that came to be, and what were you thinking?
Well, yes, and we can repeat it thousands of times, but we were all inspired by Jack LaLanne. Even back when I was 5 years old and watching my grandparents
You,
do it
you learn
with
to count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
But through the years, as Jack LaLanne would do, and if my historical data is correct, I know many, if not most, of his world feats and world records were done after the age of 40. And that was very, very inspiring. So as I was beginning my career in rope jumping, performing, then it's like, why stop? This is so healthy. It's so beneficial. You're inspiring people. And I was just motivated to keep working at it. And then once you realize and you get the right mindset, which I know Greg has written several books about, the mindset of the athlete, the mindset of competition, it's like, why not go for the top? And so the record at the time in 1988, 89 was just over 21 hours. And so I went for it. And I was fortunate with a lot of support from a lot of people in Atlanta, Georgia at the time to establish the record at 22 hours, 10 minutes, and 1 second, and established my first of the 2 Guinness World Records. And the interesting thing that a lot of people are not aware of is the rules, because you get asked all the time, well, when did you go to the restroom? When did you eat? When did you sleep? And the answers are, you don't sleep. You do go to the restroom because you can earn a 5-minute rest break for every 60 minutes that you work. And those are Guinness records for marathon activities.
Oh.
So you can accumulate your break time. So I went the first 5 hours, accumulated 25-minute rest break, and you use the rest break very strategically. Use the restroom, sips of water, little bits of food to keep your energy level up. But a lot of it, probably most of it, is the mental mindset of having the will to do it as well as
Yes.
conditioning your body.
Yeah, see, Jack saw himself coming out of the water, out of all his swims. And he said, I see myself coming out of the water. His mindset was just like yours. I mean, he just, tunnel vision. And there was no negative. You don't want a negative word in there at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's the mindset of I'm going to succeed, and there is no stopping that.
I have to tell a story about. I'm going to have Mark tell it though, but I want to bring up when we were in, I guess it was Chicago. I gotta let you tell it, but he was so impressed all these years about Jack. See, every time we went into an elevator, Jack would lift his leg and punch the button. I mean, it just, and it's just like you and I punching the button. Jack always just goes into the elevator, lifts his leg up, punches the button, off we go, up. And so I'm going to let you tell the story about Jack and meeting you in the elevator.
Well, that was an amazing story that obviously I'll never forget. But 1986, it was the Club Industry Fitness Convention in Chicago, and Jack was receiving an award with Dr. Kenneth Cooper and several others. And I just had the honor of being there and attending the conference. And then at the end of the conference, we formally introduced to each other and took a nice photo. And then I had the honor of walking with you and Jack to the elevator. And I was just about to push the elevator button going down. And then I saw his foot come up and he kicked the elevator button before I could push the button. And I just looked and I said, I want to be just like him when I grow up.
This
And
would,
and what's interesting though, is cool as it is, that really got me on a roll of doing leg kicks and flexibility kicks as part of my exercise routine. And to this day, when I go in the gym and am doing stretching, I might say put my foot up on a bar and stretch. And it's an attention getter, which really leads to the important concept of flexibility and how important flexibility is to keeping yourself fit and in great condition. And particularly as we age, flexibility is so important. But that was just an unforgettable, inspirational moment.
well, he never, I've never seen him punch the button. He always punched it with his foot. But speaking of flexibility, lately, I'm going to be 99 in March, and I'm, you stiffen up a little, and so every day I just in bed I put my leg over, one leg over and stretch, and then I put the other leg over and stretch. But if somebody's going to do this, I would suggest you do not do. Too many people make a quick movement and then then they hurt something. So if you're going to be doing anything, stretching or doing your exercise, you never jerk. You always do it smoothly. Do you agree?
Right. And as you know, I was just honored that you all invited me to write an article in the recent LaLanne Legacy newsletter. And in talking about, some of the keys to the kingdom, which, Jack's coined the phrase of exercise is king, nutrition is queen, together they make your kingdom. Well, I talked about in the article the art of stretching, and you can never rush it. As you were saying, it must be slow and controlled. And most people will put that off because they want to get through their workout and not take the time. But
Yeah.
two of the things that I think are just paramount to total wellness, young age, any age, is abdominal work and stretching. And I like to recommend abdominal work at the beginning of the exercise of your workout to get the blood flowing, stretching at the end of your workout when you're warm. And you can, as you're saying, take your time, static stretching, because that flexibility is so vitally important just for day-to-day living, everything from picking up boxes to tying shoes to walking, just to being comfortable and not having back pain. I think it's so
Yes.
important.
Greg could testify that I can every day I do in bed. I lie down in the bed and I do my jackknives. I can't touch my fingers, but I can touch my ankle. I mean, my fingers can't touch my toes, but my fingers can touch my ankles, and I do my jackknives. But then I always end up like stretching my and I'll tell you, when you get to be my age, you need to stretch.
You got to keep moving, no doubt about it. Well, Mark, you had mentioned about the stretching and obviously very important in the abdominal work. And I always like to ask our guests, because you've been in the fitness industry for more than 40 years. Tell us about your daily workout routine. What do you do on a daily, weekly cycle?
That's a great question. And I love sharing my particular philosophy with folks is For about 30 years, I do what I call instinctive training. In other words, I don't go in with a notebook and a paper. I don't go in with an iPhone or any of that. The main thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to show up and I'm going to do something, and it's going to be consistent. I also don't believe in going to the gym 3 or 4 days a week. I listen to my body, and I might go 12, 13 days in a row. And then if my body says, okay, it's time for a rest break, then I'll take that rest break. But I don't let the days on the calendar dictate how I do my workout. So with instinctive training, I'm going to go in the gym. In fact, later on this afternoon, I'll go in the gym. Now, I won't work body parts twice in a row, obviously. You have to use some, kinesiology, to make sure that you're, not overdoing certain muscles. So yesterday I worked, for example, chest, triceps, abdomen. Today I'll go in, probably feel like doing some jumping, rope jumping, some stretching, some leg work. Tomorrow I'll go in the next day, but it is not pre-planned for me. But you can do instinctive training as long as you have the mindset to be consistent. If you're just starting out, you might want a more specific regimen, such as I'm going to do weights Monday, Wednesday, Friday, aerobics Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and that's fine. And that's what a lot of the trainers will put you on a program, which is great. But I think as it becomes a part of your lifestyle, then instinctive training is what I've been doing, and it makes it a lot more fun and enjoyable and sustainable.
That knowing your body and being in the industry as long as we have,
Yes,
we're in tune to our body and its needs. So I think that was very well put in instinctive training. I think that's a terrific way to label.
that's what I do, instinctive training, Well,
Yeah.
it's time for me to do this. It's time for me to do that.
And like Jack said, it's not what you do some of the time that counts.
It's what
What
you
you
do most of the time that counts.
Exactly. So it's just that consistency. So I think you summed it up nicely there. Well, Mark, your first world record was in 1989, 22 hours, right? And
Correct.
then the next year you decided to do it again. But this time you almost doubled down. You didn't do 22 hours, you did a lot more than that. Tell us about the second world record and why you did it.
Well, pretty simple. Someone bested my 22 hours, and I'm sure a lot of folks watching the podcast, I know you, Greg, you, LaLa, understand competition. It's like, that's not going to work for me. So it was April of 1990, just over a year after the first one. I geared up again, and it's like, okay, there's no playing around this time, you know. So I set the goal of a day and a half, 36 hours, and was fortunate. Again, it was in Atlanta, Georgia, and tremendous group of people that supported were there supporting as assistants, as some of the celebrities in town, some of the Braves players, Falcons players would all come by, and that's pretty inspirational to have those ladies and gentlemen come by and support you. And we did 36 hours in 1 minute, and
Wow.
yeah, and we calculated about 120 jumps per minute, which it sounds like a lot, but with rope jumping, 2 jumps, 2 spins of the rope per second is a pretty comfortable pace. It's not too fast of a pace, but you have to keep the feet down low. You have to stay relaxed. You have to keep the mindset. And in fact, I didn't even want to talk during those 36 hours because talking takes energy.
Oh gosh, I don't see how you could talk.
Yeah. So that was the brief story behind the second record of the 36 hours of jumping.
Wow. It's
That,
amazing.
that's And that ended up being close to 260,000 revolutions, if I'm not mistaken. Is that somewhere in
That's
that
correct.
ballpark? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's amazing when you think about it. That's just incredible.
Yeah.
And so now that was again back in the early 1990s. In fact, it was 1990. And after that, since 1990 up to the present day, you have been traveling the world, right? And
Yes.
what you do, tell us about, in fact, you came to Kansas City once. In fact, the last time we were together was here in Kansas City, and we actually had lunch at a castle.
Right.
What? Tell us about that.
No, yeah, I was going to say, Elaine doesn't know this story. Yeah, so Mark came to Kansas City to an elementary school, and it happened to be in right outside of Parkville, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City. And one of my clients built an authentic European castle in Parkville, Missouri.
Oh,
And they were out of town, but gave me keys to the castle. And so I invited Mark over, and we had lunch at the castle and just had a lovely afternoon, just overlooking the lake and just getting caught up. But tell us about those events that you do, Mark, and about the inspirational message that you pass on to the kids at the schools that you visit. Tell us about that whole process.
Well, thank you. And the great thing about what I do is it's timeless. Rope jumping is timeless. It's been done by everybody from young children to famous boxers to the Rocky movies and everybody in between. So it's timeless and it's something that everybody can relate to. So I implement in with that in starting a show with action first. In fact, one of the things when I visit, say, a school or a camp or a youth organization, or even if it's a program for adults, rule number one is I am not to be introduced. I do not want to be introduced. I do not want whoever's hosting me to read, it's an honor to be there, but to read any achievements or anything like that. I want to start the show with action. That way your audience sees the action and sees what you're capable of doing. Then they're much more apt to listen and to retain the messages that you want to get across. And the messages are simple and they too are timeless. Particularly, let's take, for example, if you're working with elementary school children, let's say kindergarten through fifth grade, ages 5 or 6 to 12 or 13. Very simple messages. We all need to hear it. We all need it reinforced. Stay fit, try your best, show integrity. And when you say the word integrity, a lot of times they kind of look at you and, huh, what does that mean? Well, here's how I describe integrity to children. Doing the right thing all the time, especially when you're not being watched. And you'll see the audience go very silent. Doing the right thing, especially when you're not being watched. And how important is that as we go through life to continue integrity, whether it's business, whether it's family, whether it's fitness, no matter what. Integrity, then we get into respect, honesty, good character. And so those messages are implemented in very brief, very to the point, but in most of my, well, in all of my shows, action leads the way. You always start with action. There's plenty of action in the middle. There's action at the end of it, because you want to leave people upbeat, feeling good. And of course, still to this day, a lot of 70s and 80s music, which I love.
yeah. And those children, it goes right into that little brain of theirs. And as my father used to tell me, he'd say, you won't remember this now, but you'll remember it 10 years or 12 years from now, or 20 years from now. And there are things that he said, and that at 98, I can still remember. And, one of them is don't go through life like this with blinders on. always have an open mind, and I've known that since I've been a little kid. So those little kids that you're talking to, it's implanted there, and it's going to stay there, and especially
Absolutely.
the word integrity.
And,
Yeah.
and have an interesting story that having a background in education, I had a second grade teacher one time in South Carolina told me that the senior class in their community would always vote on what teacher had the biggest impression on those students. And she won the award as a second grade teacher. So students were 7, maybe 8 years old, but primarily 7-year-old students because they were most impressed and impacted at that young age. So it is vital that we impact young people at a very, very young age. The younger, the better.
Yes.
So what you're
The
saying.
two words that you mentioned, integrity and consistency, sound a lot like Jack's message of pride and discipline,
Yes.
right? And so
You're
there,
written
you
in
know,
that book.
yeah, and obviously you and Jack's message was implanted into you and your life, and you're now doing what this podcast is named after, passing it on, the LaLanne Pass It On podcast. And speaking of Jack and pride and discipline, I know that you got two very special calls after each of your world records. Tell us who those calls were from and what they meant to you.
Well, that's thank you for bringing that up, and it kind of gives me chills to even talk about it. And actually, I'm going to show you something. I hope this is visible here. That is, if for the younger generations, the old micro cassette that we used to use in our telephone answering machines.
Yes.
I apologize for not having a cassette player to play it, or I'd play it for you. But to Greg's point, I have recorded one of the messages. Both the calls were from Jack LaLanne, obviously, what Greg was asking. One of them, the first time, was not at the house to answer the phone. And so this is the message that I've kept for all these years on the micro cassette of Jack LaLanne congratulating me. And he told me I did a hell of a job. And so that was very
That
proud of.
sounds just like him.
Yeah. And so I have that one on recording. And then the second time I was at home and I was honored to have, a direct conversation over the phone. And he congratulated me via the telephone on the second record. So yeah, I have this micro cassette. I cherish it. And at some point I will find one of those little recorders that I can play it and share it with you.
That's awesome. And you also got a nice little handwritten note from someone, a mutual friend of ours, didn't you?
Well,
You
it's
know who
almost
that
like we
mutual
were
friend is, Elaine?
if we can, I don't know if you can see all of that, but what it was obviously when had the honor of being inducted into the National Fitness Hall of Fame in 2011, LaLa sent me and created this handwritten thank you note from the bottom of their athletic hearts in honor of Jack. Um, and that is something that I've had framed and obviously will cherish and keep forever. So it was in 2011 that LaLa had sent that to me via mail,
Yep.
and
And
still
I see, the reason I remember that, Elaine, is because I have visited Mark at his home and have gotten to see his little wall or hall of fame that he has all of those wonderful memorabilia in. And so I wanted to make sure I brought that up and let him express his gratitude to you for writing that, because I know how special that was to him.
Well, you're
and
a very special person, and
still is. And what's wonderful about it is when friends come by, family comes by, it's like you're telling the stories and that keeps the legacy alive. I think that's the most important thing that you can do is when a loved one passes or someone that you're inspired by passes, you tell their stories, you keep their legacy alive. And it is so wonderful anytime somebody walks into my home and I can share these stories. It's just very, very inspirational. It's exciting. It's part of the history. And what's not to love about it?
Oh, great. You know, I have to, you've inspired so many people to jump rope. And when people are jumping out, remember Rick Hirsch is our agent and from years and years. And his wife, Jeannie, she's a jump roper and she wore out one of the jump. We gave away jump ropes for his 90th birthday in New York. And she wore one out and wondered if I had an extra one, so I sent it to her.
And the interesting thing about it is I've had the honor to um, do some programs from everything from early childhood programs to even, some of our citizens in assisted living homes. And there's always a way, and one of my most important concepts is rope moving, feet moving. So you can even spin the rope to your side if you're not even comfortable jumping over it. Or
Yeah.
if you're just learning, so say a 3 or 4 year old child, spin the rope to the side. Actually, I call it a jet spin because jet spin sounds cooler than just spinning the rope to the side. So you do the jet spin and the rope is moving and the feet are moving. And that's the first way you can begin. And as long as we are moving and our bodies are in motion, we're going to be healthier.
Right, right.
Absolutely. It's a pretty simple message of movement, right? Just move. And that's so
It is.
important.
Well,
Yeah,
like Jack said, dying's easy. You got to work at living. That means
there you
move.
go. That's exactly right.
Another Jack LaLanneism,
Yeah.
Exactly.
LaLanneism.
Exactly. Well, so Mark, we know what the last 40 years has been. Let's take a look forward. What do the next 10 years look like for Mark Rothstein? Well, what's next?
Well, great question. It's a pretty simple answer. I keep doing what I'm doing. And there's two words. Now, a lot of people will debate me on these, but here are these two words that I don't typically use. Those two words are diet and retirement. Rather than diet, if someone could just tweak their nutritional lifestyle, and get into that pattern, you're going to be healthier rather than retire. And I certainly understand the concept. You've worked hard for 40, 50, 60 years, time to give yourself a break and enjoy life. I understand that. But as Jacqueline said, you have to work at living. So if you're doing something that you love and enjoy, why retire? And then I go back also to a gentleman named Dan Buettner who created the Blue Zones concept. And the concept really consists of exercise, having a sense of purpose, having a sense of community. So that sense of purpose, I think, is very, very vital. And since I am blessed with, and I certainly work hard at keeping myself fit and able to perform, that word retirement is not in my future. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, one, to inspire, and two, for the enjoyment of what I do.
There you go.
You know,
I,
the word diet, in my lectures, I used to say, I don't use the word diet. I like you, I don't use the word, I use a way of life. And that was my saying instead of diet. It's a way of life.
and rather than retire, look at it as rewire. Just change things up a little bit and keep going forward. So yeah, that's good message. I love
Well
that.
said. That's well said. I like that. I love corresponding these days, whether it's, parents, organizations, or physical educators or administrators. And like I mentioned, I believe I'll be doing a program in Northern Idaho for another assisted living community in the springtime. And I still just love, and I don't know if everyone is aware of this, but I still love traveling and I still drive from my home base to every program in the United States, in the continental United States.
From Florida to Idaho is a long drive.
About 3,274 miles. I'll tell you another unique thing is learning about our United States and going to so many historical communities as I've done, because I've driven now almost 3 million miles around the United States, going everywhere from very rural communities to big metropolitan areas. And it's quite an education, as well as when you're inspiring people, but a great education to learn so much about our country.
Right.
Absolutely.
You're an amazing person, and we think you're wonderful, and I hope that you continue inspiring people, and for as long as you can, and I hope you live longer than I am.
Well, it's just an honor to be a part of your podcast, and I love everything that you stand for, and I just feel blessed that we can have this conversation, and I will certainly continue inspiring and keeping Jack LaLanne's legacy alive and your legacy alive as well.
Well, I don't need a legacy. I just need Jack's legacy. I want to make sure he gets his due because, a lot of people think it started with Richard Simmons and Jane Fonda, and it didn't. It started in the he started inspiring and lecturing and whatnot in the 30s and inventing equipment and the leg extension machine and the squat machine, which is now the Smith machine. He did all that, but people don't know that about him,
Right.
So, and if they read our book, Pride and Discipline, I guess they'd find out a little bit more.
Well, here's another great artifact that I have from Jack LaLanne. It's one of his albums called Glamour Stretch, and I've had this one for years and years, along with a lot of other of his memorabilia. And it's just an honor to have this, and I can still play it on my vinyl record player.
Yes, he was the first one to come up with the stretches, and we called it the glamour stretcher, and then an easy way for men, but it was the first the stretcher that it's very popular today. So I remember that well. We sold a lot of glamour stretchers.